So what is desired configuration management? The objective of this feature is not to push configurations to a machine. That's not what this is about. This is about creating a baseline of what you want the configuration of a machine to be. So the desired configuration of that machine. And then based on that baseline of configuration elements, we can run a scan. So the agent is going to take the desired configuration as it's defined and compare that to its current configuration. And where do they match and where are they off? Because then we can have a report, we can run desired configuration reports to view that data and say, hey, who in the environment, which machines in the environment are outside of our desired configuration? Now, we can certainly do this for desktops and laptops, and there might be certain configuration elements that we desire to be a certain way. And that is certainly true. But servers are where we're really going to implement something like this, because servers typically do have a desired configuration, a baseline configuration that we need for security purposes. So, for instance, if we have a best practice implementation of an Exchange server, well, then I would want to create a desired configuration baseline so that I can compare that and I can run a report that says, hey, is that Exchange server configured according to our documented best practice? Or potentially according to Microsoft's documented best practice. So Microsoft can actually publish some of these desired configuration baselines. We can import them into the system, and then we can run them against our systems and see how we compare. Those types of desired configurations could be ways of making, ways of configuring Exchange to be faster, more efficient, more stable, more secure. And as you know, Microsoft already publishes their best practices. And there is a tool out there called the Best Practices Analyzer where you can sort of analyze an environment. You can do that manually. This is a way that we can take those same elements and we can just run it on a regular scheduled basis, and then all we have to do is view the reports to find out where can we make improvements in our configuration in order to be consistent with our best practices, possibly Microsoft's best practices. But the point is, all we're really doing is getting information. We're not changing anything. So it's really a question of what are we going to do with that information? Now that we know that a certain machine is not configured according to our greatest desire, then now we go and we fix it, and we make changes in the environment accordingly. So we define our corporate configuration baselines and standards for the various different computers in the environment, typically following security or performance-related guidelines. And then we report on compliance or non-compliance, depending on how we want to view the data. Now we can combine compliance data with other config manager features to manage the clients. So for instance, deploying software packages. Once we know which ones are out of compliance, perhaps we want to deploy a software package that changes the configuration of something, or software updates. Perhaps the compliance report is telling us that we're missing a certain patch that we really should have. And since we don't have it, now we can incorporate that into our software updates and make sure those machines get that patch. So the usage scenarios are what we've already started to talk about. Detect server configuration changes. So sometimes configurations tend to float over time, especially if we're deploying updates. Various different admins have access to those machines and are making changes here and there. We can, on a weekly basis perhaps, view the reports and see what's changed. Improve help desk troubleshooting. The help desk can be somewhat proactive if we start to see certain machines that are going outside of particularly desired configuration elements. And then we can address regulatory requirements, compliance requirements. All kinds of regulations out there. I work a lot in the finance industry, and we are subject to SEC regulations. You might be subject to HIPAA regulations or SOX. Either way, there are regulations in place, and we need to remain compliant. Or in some cases, there are our own corporate regulations or corporate policies, and we need to remain compliant. In other cases, it might relate to our service level agreements. So the point is, we need to be able to keep track of whether we are compliant and be able to report on that compliance and then fix problems where we're non-compliant. And then verify both pre and post configuration changes. So anytime we actually do make a change, we want to be able to verify it. And we can use this feature to do that. So the components that make up this entire feature are configuration items and then configuration baselines. So a configuration item is the individual element and assessment criteria that goes along with it. So these are really the building blocks. So what would be an example of a configuration item? Well, it could be a registry value. And then what is that value set to? Right? Because that's a configuration. A lot of configuration is stored inside of the Windows registry. So we pick the values and we assign those values and we specify what we would desire that value to be. Another thing might be an actual file or file folder. We want to evaluate the permissions of that file folder to make sure that the desired security configuration is set, or the existence of a file or existence of a folder, or non-existence. If it's gone, if it's not there, we could be out of compliance. So there's a number of different elements we're going to configure, but these are the building blocks. Now, any one registry value is not in and of itself enough to evaluate the overall configuration of a machine. So that's the item. We're going to put all of the items we want into a baseline. So it's essentially the baseline is like a package in a way, taking all the elements and combining them together. The baseline is what we assign to computers through the collections, and then they're going to be evaluated on a set schedule. So those are the elements that we're dealing with. Now, configuration packs. This is what we call what we might get from Microsoft, what we might get from a online community or a third-party source. And what they are baselines, pre-configured elements and baselines that we can import into our system and use. Maybe we're going to use them as a starting point. So we're going to evaluate the configuration pack that we get from Microsoft. Let's use the example I gave earlier of evaluating an Exchange Server environment, right? So in the same way we might run the Exchange Server Best Practices Analyzer, we can take some of those same configuration elements, and Microsoft has put them together into a pack, and now we can use that as a baseline for our Exchange servers. And when we run that, we're essentially doing the best practices and analysis, but we're letting Config Manager do the analysis. So all we have to do is view the reports. The point is we can import these, and we can customize them, we can go in and make changes to them, but somebody else has written them. And as we get in and we start to look at how we create these, you're going to be happy that somebody else has written them. Getting these packs is a great starting point, and then you edit them appropriately.